Hi and welcome to this short video guide to the control schemes available in novaWARS. These range from the simple and easy to use to the slightly more sophisticated that, with some setup and practice, gives you pretty much game console level control on a touchscreen. The first option and default is touch controls. Simply tap where you want your ship to go. Tap your ship to come to a stop. Tap inside the aiming ring to turn to face that point. Drag from the aiming ring onto a target so your ship will turn to track that target. You can also hold down where you want to go to keep your engines active. There are buttons for weapon and secondary ability. If you open options, you can reposition them anywhere on the screen. On the left are options for these controls where you can change the button size and visibility. There is also an auto shoot option. When enabled, your ship will automatically fire at enemies or rocks, meaning you don't need to use the weapon button. This makes for much easier and more intuitive play. Screen controls. These are conventional on-screen buttons. You can reposition them wherever you want and change size and visibility. If you find you don't always hit the button, which is the general problem with on-screen buttons that lack tactile feedback for your fingers, consider using the advanced control scheme. Directional control provides a virtual thumbstick that controls direction and engines. Smaller movements turn your ship, while larger movements will result in you flying in that direction. In the options, you can set the dead space to avoid accidentally turning on minimal movements when first pressing. You can also change the size of the turn radius and the fly radius. The advanced controls are like on-screen buttons, except they're smart and aren't fixed in place, instead repositioning based on your input. This means that even if your thumbs start to drift position across the screen, the buttons will still work as expected. They provide a very high accuracy, but you still need to train your muscle memory to make adequate movements. For example, you may find that you intend to change direction, but don't actually move your thumb any distance the other way. Enabling show touches in the options lets you track this. The blue line shows the center of the controls, the large arrow shows where you just pressed, and the small arrow where you pressed last time. This way you can see if you moved your thumb enough. This button on the bottom left shows you where you have touched and what action that resulted in. As you can see, unlike conventional buttons, your touches can creep all over the screen and yet you still get effective control. After a little while, you get used to the button positions and end up with very tight grouping of inputs and very accurate controls. There are numerous options to tailor controls to your preferences and device. Firstly, button sensitivity is how much your thumb has to move to change direction. Smaller buttons are more sensitive if you prefer small thumb movements, but are more susceptible to wrong presses. The next option is dead space on a press. If enabled, you have to slide into the button after a press, like a thumbstick. Set this option to 0 to use buttons that respond immediately to presses. Margin sets the maximum closeness to the edge that the controls can go. If you find your thumb wanders really close to the edge, you might lose a button off the screen, so can increase the margin to prevent this. However, too big a margin could require your thumb to be too far into the screen and be uncomfortable. Next are the same options but for the action buttons. The first changes sensitivity, how far your thumb has to move to register as a change in button. The dead space option has a little more flexibility than for left and right. In the center, the on-screen buttons work like buttons, activating when your thumb presses them. Larger values work like a thumbstick with no action on press and you having to slide into the button. Smaller values add an overlap of the buttons. This results in a button press when you touch, but also enables you to slide your thumb to the middle zone that'll activate both controls. So you can press on thrust, then slide into thrust and shoot, then further into just shoot. The next option allows you to adjust how far your thumb needs to move down to activate the secondary button. Finally, there are options for side margin and top margin for if your buttons start creeping off the top of the screen. There's also an auto hide option which fades the buttons away, leaving no on-screen controls visible. When very accustomed to the controls, this gives you a clutter-free play area. Controller. Use this option with a hardware controller. In this example, I'm using a Sony DualShock 4 with a mount. You can map any of the controls onto any of the controller's inputs. Press the control you want to change, such as left. This brings up a display of the inputs in your controller. Press the stick or button you want to be the left direction and see which value changes. Press that value to assign it. In this case, I want thrust to be on the X button, so that's button 1. I want fire on the right shoulder button, which is button 14. and secondary ability on the right trigger, which is button 5. If an axis doesn't map properly, select the input while holding the controller where you want it, so it maps as a plus or minus 1.